Hi, I'm Heather Pemberton Levy, host of Smarter with Gartner. Today we're live from Gartner headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. And joining me is Scott Collins, Vice President and Team Leader with Gartner for Sales Leaders. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Heather.
And listen, B2B selling is really important in organizations. And we are going to hear today about some new research from Gartner for Sales Leaders about how to win what Gartner calls more high-quality, low-regret deals, 3 types of sales approaches to information, and which one outperforms its peers. We'll also talk about how to bring this new type of seller approach to your organization. So stay tuned with us for the next 30 minutes. We'll also take your questions live later in the program, so post them in the comment section. So Scott, today we're going to talk about this new role of B2B sellers and how they can increase the likelihood that customers will buy and not regret their purchase. So important, right? Yeah. But let's first talk about how the B2B buying landscape has changed, right? Because over the last several years, such a proliferation of digital content and tools, it's a different landscape.
Yeah, absolutely is, Heather. You know, you think about it so much today, it's not so much a sales process, it's a buying process, right? We have customers that are armed with more information than ever before, and they can find it on their own. In fact, our own data tells us over 2/3 of the buying process, as reported by customers, is simply spent researching online and offline on their own without any supplier involvement at all. And so customers are empowered with more information than ever before. And it's leaving us as suppliers and sales professionals starting to be locked out in that world.
Yeah, and you know, we have found, we bought a big purchase in our own content marketing group. We organized a task force, we had lots of people, we did a lot of research on our own. And, you know, we hop around, we go through different channels, we talk to the vendors, we talk to the internal stakeholders. What does that mean for the suppliers?
Well, I'm sure many of our viewers can appreciate this, being as senior sales leaders making buying decisions for their own companies as well. And so you just think about how challenging and difficult that is, right? You have a task force. Well, everyone's doing their own research on their own. And then you come together in a meeting or you hop on a call, and I got to figure out, like, well, what's the information actually telling us? You know, and then you found one piece of information and someone on your team finds a completely different, conflicting piece of information. Now what do you do? In fact, our data tells us customers reported 15% of that buying time is just spent deconflicting information in part of the process. So that's a lot of time of moving forward, moving backward, deciding what information is in, what information is out, and then you add so many different people to that equation, and buying is just really, really hard today. It's really difficult to make a confident purchase decision.
So more information isn't necessarily better information. And I know that being in content marketing, we're creating a lot of information, we're creating a lot of quality information, but this doesn't necessarily help, is what you're saying.
It's really interesting. So, you know, we've been a bit in an arms race in sales and marketing, honestly, to provide better and better information, and for really good reasons, right? We've built insight generation capabilities. We've aspired and built thought leadership that we've put out there in the marketplace, all to educate our customers and our clients and our prospects. And what we're finding is customers are saying now, it's all really good information. In fact, high quality. So, you know, just this past year, we found 89% of buyers said that the information they found as part of their purchase process was really high quality. I mean, that's effectively everyone saying what I'm finding out there is really, really good. Now, to your point, even though it's really good, what do I do when I've got all of this high quality information? And we really think we found a new part in this B2B buying journey for our clients and our customers out there where we've hit a tipping point, because now I've got too much good information. And what do I do in a world where I've got too much high quality information?
So we're going to find out. But first, post your questions. If you have questions for Scott about your selling situation, we're going to take them in just a little bit. Okay, so what can sellers do to help in this situation where buyers have a lot of information and they don't know what to do about deconstructing it all?
Yeah, so this has a huge impact to how we think about it in terms of a sales approach and engaging our clients. Because if you think about what happens when I have too much high quality information, what our customers are saying is, I still find that it's trustworthy, but it's contradictory. So now what I do? Or it's high quality and trustworthy, but I'm overwhelmed with too much. And so they employ a variety of coping strategies and mechanisms. For example, status quo decisions. I'm just not going to do anything because I'm just overwhelmed with too much information. So let's do nothing. And so what does that mean for us in sales and marketing? Specifically is we set out to understand, well, what is going to drive those high quality, low regret deals, right? And those are the deals we all want to win in sales, right? These are the bigger, better solutions, the broader solutions. So even customers said we ended up selecting the larger offering compared to a lower, smaller base offering. But what we also measured is they were less likely to regret that purchase, right? Too often in sales, we think a win is a win once we've got the ink on that contract. That's not necessarily the case because high levels of regret, what we find, drives lower customer loyalty and high levels of negative advocacy against us in the marketplace. So we've got to look for the right kinds of opportunities when growing our business. And so what we found, interestingly, in the data to win those kinds of opportunities from a customer perspective is they needed to see high levels of confidence in the information that they came across and were provided as part of the purchase journey. In fact, customers that found high levels of confidence were 157% higher in terms of their likelihood to select a high quality, low regret deal. I mean, that's a huge number in terms of us as suppliers winning the deals we all want to win. Now, on the flip side, what customers also reported is there are situations where they have high levels of seller skepticism in the entire buying process. And so, as you can imagine, if we have high levels of seller skepticism, that in fact decreases the likelihood we're going to win the deals we want to win. In fact, by 164%. So, huge impact. So the long way to get to your question is I've got to reduce skepticism in me as a seller, and I have to increase my customers' confidence in the information itself. Not confidence in me as a person, but confidence in the information that they are coming across and I'm providing.
So it's an interesting position for sales reps to be in because they're only part of the process for 17% of the time. Mm-hmm. Customers are out there accessing all of this information, and yet it puts the sales process or the likelihood of this high quality, low regret purchase in jeopardy.
It absolutely does.
Which is difficult. So I imagine those are some of the questions you went into how to solve that into the research with. So what did you discover that sellers can do to try to influence this?
Yeah, so again, remember, I got to increase confidence in information and I have to decrease skepticism in the seller. So those are the two variables we're looking to control and impact. So what we found when we went digging into what sellers can be doing are 3 seller approaches to information. So this is fundamentally an information strategy that sales professionals take when engaging their customers. And so there are 3 different distinctive approaches. One was a giving approach. So if I'm a seller that takes a giving approach in terms of information strategy, it's pretty straightforward. My approach is let me just give more to my customer or to my prospect. Because if a little information is a good thing, well, more must be a better thing to my customer. And so I believe I can add more value in the buying process from a customer perspective by giving more and more information. And if the customer asks for more information, I'm going to be the first to respond and give them more information.
And that sounds like it would be a nice role, right? To be giving more information, to helping them, to providing them more information. But it sounds like in this environment, it might also be problematic because they're getting so much information.
Yeah, I mean, it feels right, doesn't it? But when you look back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago in terms of customers being overwhelmed with high quality information or finding contradictory high quality information, a giving approach is making matters worse. So I'm most likely to use those coping mechanisms as a buyer.
Okay. What about the second approach?
The second approach is a telling approach that sellers take to information. And so a telling approach is again, exactly what it sounds like. But these are oftentimes sales professionals who've been on our teams for a very long time. They've got great expertise, decades in the marketplace. But their approach to information is their own personal stories, their own opinions. Let me give you my recommendations and my guidance to the buyer and to the customer. We always talk about in sales, I really wish I had more sellers with gravitas as part of my team. And oftentimes that's what we're talking about is this telling approach towards information.
Which I wonder in today's environment if that's too traditional, or not customer centric enough.
Yeah, and again, think about the two variables we're looking at, right? We're trying to reduce seller skepticism, and we're trying to increase confidence in information from a customer perspective. And so a telling approach, if you think about those two, might have different impacts in things like skepticism of a seller, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what's the third?
The third is a sense-making approach, as we've called it, to information. So these sellers take a very different strategy than the other two. So a sense-making strategy is one about taking a look at all of the information that customers have access to and might come across, helping customers understand the interconnectivity of all of that information, giving them a framework for assessing the information they're coming across, having and providing more context to the information that customers will find, not only from myself as a seller or my company as a supplier, but also other information, maybe competitive information out there, maybe third-party information from, research organizations perhaps, or from someone who's writing their own blog who used to be a CIO or an expert in the space. Well, I'm still reading that as a customer or a potential buyer. And so how do I make sense of all of this oftentimes contradictory, conflicting, and overwhelming information?
Very interesting. So it gives them a role in the context of how buyers are consuming and navigating all of this information as this trusted guide. Mm-hmm. What's the response been? What are you hearing from sellers and sales leaders and organizations who we've presented this research to?
Well, you hear a lot of, well, this makes sense. And they see their best people doing it. And so, by the way, not surprisingly, when you look at the data, the approach most likely to win the high quality, low regret deal is the sense-making approach, as we've probably figured out and your viewers figured out. But sales leaders respond oftentimes, yeah, I see this. Some of my better people are doing this. I see a need for more of this across my team. And certainly buyers in the data respond to that kind of approach. And so it's really interesting to see what is a sense-making approach all about? How do we bring that to the organization and so that all our sellers can feel that they can take this information strategy to customers versus maybe some of the other things that they're doing day to day. Mm-hmm.
And so an information strategy in a selling world is a new approach, right? And probably requires some hooks into the organization. What are we talking to organizations about as far as implementing it? So I'm a sales rep. I'm not actually a sales rep, but if I were a sales rep or for sales organizations, what are we telling them as far as how do you start to build the skills? How do we start to implement this from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So one, there's three big pieces of a sense-making approach. One, we say connect. So how do I connect customers to relevant information, relevant resources? Again, oftentimes supplier provided, and we'll talk about that. How do I help clarify information for my customers? Again, I've got contradictory information, it's overwhelming, help me figure this out. Also then, how can I help customers collaborate in their learning so I can be a part of their learning process across all of this information? So if there's one thing to remember around this sense-making approach, it's connect, clarify, and collaborate. This is how we want to think about it. Now, as sales leaders and as organizations, how do we make this happen? One is, how do we integrate this into our skills and our competencies and our talent strategy, right? As we've identified this being the approach to winning these kinds of deals, we all want to win. And so competency sets, updating those, taking a look at your hiring strategy, the way you screen your sales talent coming into the organization. Can we be changing, in fact, our job descriptions to some degree that attracts talent that innately has some of the sense-making approach already kind of baked into their day-to-day? So the talent piece is absolutely part of this. Number two is, how do we think about helping our managers? As so many of our viewers will know, sales management at the front line is critical to the success of any sales organization, and out there in the field every day working with their teams. How do we arm them with the tools, with the frameworks to coach their team, to help their team at the deal level, right? So many of us today in sales, we all have deal review sessions. We all have opportunity strategies. We all have account strategies. How many of us have an information strategy? That's different. And that's hard for managers, right? So can we give them the tools to add that to some of what they're already doing in their workflow out there in the field? And then the last one is the organizational capability, is how do I turn sense making on across the organization? Can I do this in terms of the tools that we're giving the sales organization? How do I help them identify the best pieces of information that they can provide that might be helpful in helping customers be more confident in the questions that they're asking and the decisions that they make in terms of information itself? How can we even help sellers anticipate some of that as part of their information strategy? And so there's things we're seeing companies do from an organizational capability standpoint, getting that right.
And there's a lot there. Let's unpack it just a little bit. And I am still thinking about it through the filter of what my team went through in purchasing a large solution, or what sellers in our organization go through. So from a skills standpoint, what kind of skills would you look for a sense maker? They're going to help buyers navigate and look at information. What would you be looking for there?
Well, the first one, honestly, is diagnosing. Right? How can I better understand the information challenges my customer is facing? Understanding what they might could come across. And so much is having a deeper understanding of those information challenges from a client or a customer perspective. And so it's a diagnosing type approach and skill, which is, we've talked about asking good questions in sales for ages. Like, this is different, right? This is different. Having that deeper, better understanding. And then it's really looking at the skills necessary to deliver that guidance, right? So again, this is a lot of guidance and help. This is not telling. This isn't just throwing a ton of information, as we talked about earlier. But how can I be directional? But how can I do that in a more Socratic type method? I want to lead my customers and let them figure it out in a more helpful way. And so I can do that via conversation, the recommendations I might make. I want to give you some ideas of how to assess the different data or information you might find out there. I'm not going to tell you that that's wrong information, but I'm going to give you some guidance on how, as a customer or as a buying team, you can figure that out, and how you can, again, assess maybe conflicting information that you're probably going to find because I, as a seller, know it's already out there.
Right. And then the second piece was about getting them to the right information, I think. Was it connecting?
Connecting,
yes.
Yeah, to relevant resources or information.
And so that's interesting, because being in content marketing, of course, we work a lot with our integrated marketing team and the sales reps, as far as getting them the tools they need as they're in the purchase process. So how do organizations, I imagine they have to look at their processes, right? There's some change management there.
Yeah.
But necessary.
Absolutely.
Because if buyers are buying differently, then the organization has to adapt to that. And that's a big part of what this is about.
It's a huge part of it. A big part of that organizational piece, and we've been talking with clients, like yourself, as sales and marketing leaders for years, and our viewers, is, do we truly understand how our customers buy? Do we know how they make purchase decisions? And are we using that as kind of that single piece of music across sales and marketing as we align our content strategy, as we align our sales strategy in this world of increasingly high quality information? It absolutely impacts both sides. Think about all the tools and resources we have in sales today that marketers are producing for us, that sales enablement is creating for us as a function. There's a lot I can pick and choose from. So many of us have sales portals, and I'm sure many of our viewers can appreciate sometimes you go out there and you cannot find what you're looking for.
Right.
And that just makes it much more difficult of, well, what is the right best information to put in front of my customer that helps me take a sense-making approach? At what point should I deliver a certain tool or a certain resource or a certain guide? And then, is our content that marketing and sales enablement is producing, is it helping with a sense-making approach, or is it maybe just influencing a giving approach? And so we have to take a hard look at, as an organization, how do we support and create the infrastructure and the capability to allow for sense-making to even happen?
Interesting. We're going to get to the next one in just a minute, but we are about to take your questions. So if you have them, post them live. We're just a couple minutes out from answering viewer questions. Okay, Scott, I think the third was it collaborating?
Yes, collaborate with customer learning. Yeah.
All right, so collaborating, that requires now some new process within the organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one is, do I know how my customers are learning, right? So we talked about some of the information challenges they might be facing. Yet I can map this out organizationally to some degree of how can I, as a seller, better participate and collaborate with my customers in their learning of information and trying to figure all of this out. And so there absolutely is a sense for, well, when should I collaborate? When are customers at the right moment to do some of this? And again, the guidance that an organization can provide an individual seller, because these things can be tough if we just leave it to individual sellers to figure out, to take today and go, okay, so I want you to take a sense-making approach. Great. How am I supposed to do that?
Right.
To your point, really is a lot of enablement and a lot of support and an organizational capability piece.
Right. Right. Right before we take the questions, I know that there might be some about how this aligns with the Challenger selling that we released several years ago, and organizations some are maybe more familiar than others, some may be further along their journey, but it is also another type of selling, and I think this advances it as far as I understand.
Yeah, we see the two absolutely complementing. So many of our viewers might be familiar with the Challenger work we did about 10 years ago now, believe it or not. And so Challenger was a set of seller profiles that we found in our data at the time. And so we still believe Challenger is the way to drive sales rep behavior out there, teach tailoring and taking control. But what we find is this sense-making approach supports it, but elevates it, kind of operates at a different level to some degree, because now the way we talk about with clients who are on that journey for many years is if you look at giving, telling, and sense making, well, I could take a Challenger approach, but what if I'm giving when it comes to an information strategy? I can overwhelm my customer. I can run into some of the same challenges potentially that we've run into. And so the good news is, we know there's still some value in high quality information, so that teaching piece is still absolutely critical. And many of our viewers who might be on that journey will know we've talked about commercial insight for many years as being so crucial to getting the message right. And we see that as still right answer today. As an organization, we've got to enable our sellers with commercial insight in order to deliver that to the market. But what we don't want to do is then leave our customers kind of on their own devices to then make sense of all of this other information they're going to come across.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, we are ready for viewer questions. Greg is here to help read aloud any that have come in from the comment section. We hope you've been participating. Greg, what's our first question?
So our first question is from Deirdre. Deirdre is from Dublin, and she asks, what % of the buyer's journey do you think is complete before a buyer will engage a vendor?
It's a really good question, Deirdre. So I'm going to go back to some previous research that we've done to that exact question. And so what we found, and we surveyed thousands of B2B buyers to answer that, is when you're in your purchase journey, at what point do you reach out and contact that supplier, whether it's us or our competitors? That data point several years ago was 57%. So customers reported that they were 57% on average through their purchase journey or process before they reached out and talked to a single supplier. And so you can imagine what's happening for that 57% while customers are out there, again, learning on their own, trying to make sense of all of this high quality, oftentimes conflicting or contradictory information. So we're getting engaged pretty late. And there's plenty of clients out there who say, boy, I wish 57% was my number, because it feels like 80 or 90%.
Right, sure. Interesting. What's another question, Greg?
Next question is from Purnima. She's from Mumbai and is asking, is too much information a good thing? What makes the buyer think that the information on hand is high quality?
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So too much information is a bad thing, right? So there is a tipping point if I have too much high quality, good information. And the question is really interesting, because this is about customer and buyer perception. Right? If I perceive the information to be of high quality, then it's high quality. Whether we as suppliers or sellers agree or disagree with that, it's all buyer and customer perception. And so again, what they're telling us is it's all high quality, for the most part, 90% of them anyway.
Okay. How about another question, Greg?
Next question is from Prabhu from Bangalore. How do reviews contribute to the decision-making process now versus in the past?
How to review
Reviews. I'm assuming reviews for software or big technology solutions. Let's assume.
Let's assume.
Perhaps that's it.
Yeah. It's another piece of information, isn't it? Right.
Right.
Think about it.
Peer information.
Peer information, right?
So
You know,
important.
it is just one piece of information. So in fact, and we didn't cover it early on, but as part of the broader data in terms of understanding customer buying, we know from customer reported data that they will seek out on average 4.5 information sources as part of their buying process and buying decision. Now that's, by the way, each person. So back, Heather, sorry, to your example around content marketing, right? It's all about my team. So my team engages in 4.5 individually. That's a lot of information. Reviews being, one of those. And so there is an impact there that's considered high quality information oftentimes. And so there's value there. But again, just one piece of this high quality information story.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
We do. Here's a question from Raghav. He's from India, asking, how does sense making get into the DNA of an organization if it's so effective?
Into the DNA.
DNA.
That's a good question because that's eventually where you want to go, right?
That's the goal, right?
Okay.
So that is absolutely what we all want to aspire to as sales leaders and as organizations is how do I just make this part of what we do as a sales team every single day? And so a lot of it comes to organizational capability. Are we focusing on the talent side of the equation as we talked about? Are we supporting our managers to drive this in the field? And then are we building that capability over time to make it part of the DNA? So it requires some switching. It requires understanding those information challenges and the types of information. It requires that we, as an organization, are not just producing information for the sake of producing information and putting it out there, even though it might be really high quality.
Right. Okay. How about another question?
Another question from Brian. Brian is from Detroit, and he asks, what about existing accounts? My sales team is unable to grow those who are already customers. Any tips?
Yeah, and you think about existing accounts, right? So many of us have a land and expand strategy out there today.
So important,
Yeah,
right?
it is. And so again, we want to think about how do I win those high quality but low regret deals in terms of driving expansion. So when you think about a sense-making approach, it's a big part of driving growth of any kind, whether that's net new business, new acquisition, whether that's growth inside existing accounts as well. What's really important when we've done a separate body of work just on that, growing existing accounts, is so many of us in sales, and oftentimes sales leaders, we focus heavily on high levels of service and support in sales. I just need to take care of my customer and make them happy. And there is value there. What we do know is that drives high levels of retention and renewal. However, what it doesn't do is it doesn't drive any growth. Customers are no more likely to buy from us or buy again from us in a new area or a new product set if we delivered solely high levels of service and support. And so we have to find ways to help them with sense making as well as make them smarter. So they're very interested in, focused on their business. How can I think differently about my operations, my business? You get very closely into the commercial insight conversation we were having earlier, and why that's so important, even inside existing accounts. And now you level the sense-making approach to information on top of it, and it's a really great 1-2 punch.
Terrific. Okay, I think we have some more questions.
We
Greg?
do. Here's a question from Susan. She's from Sydney. How can I help my sales managers be more effective in this high-quality information environment?
Sales managers.
Sales managers, yeah, so critical, so important. So when we think about sales managers, one is tools. What tools am I giving these individuals, the support, right? How do I make sure they're on board with all of this too? So we do know, as many viewers will know in leadership, to drive change, you need your sales managers bought into these ideas, bought in to the fact that, yeah, you know what, our customers are overwhelmed with high quality information, that there is a role for us to play with this sense-making approach and to shift that as our information strategy. And so it's working with sales managers and on helping them identify where are those information challenges, how can they guide their teams and coach their teams to identify that, to then collaborate with customers in that customer learning opportunity. And so we've seen organizations do a really nice job of starting to integrate this into things like deal review sessions, opportunity planning. And so you can really start to implement it tactically early versus waiting too long and not using it right away.
Makes sense, sure. Next question, Greg.
Next question is from Olivia. Olivia is from London. And she asks, how does sense making relate to Challenger?
Okay. So we covered that earlier. Anything else you want to add on that? It sounds as though it's very complementary.
It is, it's not necessarily an either or, and we'd encourage for our viewers that are clients out there of Gartner for Sales Leaders, it's probably also worth a conversation depending your knowledge of Challenger, where you're at on the journey for Challenger. The answer might be different for each of you out there. So again, complementary support. There are some differences in terms of how we see them working well together, and so it's really important. When we talk about the different viewpoints that Challenger and sense making kind of take from a customer perspective. Remember, if you go back to the sense making piece, it's all about increasing confidence in the information so that customers better understand what questions to ask, how to deal with conflicting information.
Right.
That's really where sense maker is going to take Challenger to that next level.
So I have a couple questions for you, Scott, to help
Okay.
our viewers get to know you better. We always ask these at the end. If you weren't a Gartner analyst, what would you be?
A professional golfer, hopefully.
We haven't
my
had
current
that one
game
yet.
isn't good enough right now, but
Okay. Favorite city you traveled to in the last year?
that would be Queenstown, New Zealand.
Was
Absolutely
that pleasure?
beautiful. Oh, it was
I'm
pleasure.
taking it that was pleasure.
Yeah.
That's
If
great.
I could get Gartner to send me there, that'd be great.
In stressful situations, what's your go-to comedian or TV show?
TV show, it's Parks and Rec. I enjoy me some Ron Swanson.
Okay, total downtime. That's great. And finally, if technology could help one intractable problem in the world, what would it be?
Oh man, there's a few, right? Like there's plenty of things that need fixing. I think right now, just because it's so top of mind, you think about the opioid crisis right now, and there's so much I think that we could be doing, and it'd be great if we could figure out a way technology could better help the struggles out there right now.
That's a great point. Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Scott. We really appreciate your time. This has been super illuminating about how to help sellers win more deals. You can download the ebook about sense making to get more information. Check out Smarter with Gartner. Sign up for the newsletter to stay on top of the latest big business and technology trends. Make sure to stay tuned to LinkedIn Live and follow us. We'll have more programming soon. Take care.